Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Ryan Dalkin. I am doing the show by myself today. We're doing a little bit of a special show here. This is a show strictly about, the Chicago Cubs. I understand they just lost in the wild card game. I'm recording this as of Thursday, so they lost 2 days ago on Tuesday. And they lost to the Colorado Rockies. But I know a lot of you are upset about the game, and I am too, especially angry about the game. But today I'm just going to talk a little bit about a lot of the ups and downs for the season and kind of why, in my point of view, the Cubs lost that that wild card game. And for all of you that don't know the Cubs, basically if you're, kind of not following the Cubs at all or anything about baseball, the Cubs lost in a tiebreaker game to the Milwaukee Brewers. That was Monday. That was a game for the to win the division. And the Brewers and Cubs were tied after the Brewers came back after being down multiple games. And the Cubs just slumped and struggled and eventually had to win, they had to be undefeated in their last 6 games in the season. And they lost 1 game, but the Brewers were undefeated in their last 6 games, so the Brewers were able to tie it up and force a tiebreaker at Wrigley. And the Cubs lost 3-1, and the only person to get a run was a home run off of Anthony Rizzo. And then so the Cubs went and played a wild card game. The Rockies had a very similar situation with a tiebreaker to the Dodgers, but the Dodgers won. So it was the Rockies and Cubs in the wild card game on Tuesday night at Wrigley Field. But the Cubs ended up losing that game 2-1 in 13 innings. It was a very exciting game. The first run for the Rockies was scored in the first inning, I believe. I believe it was the first inning. And then after that, the Rockies couldn't score until the 13th inning. So the Cubs had a great night defensively to prevent them from scoring in 11 out of the 13 innings. So great job by them. Jon Lester had an incredible night pitching. Although he did give up the run, he came in clutch at certain moments, and I believe he is not the person to blame in this game. I know people say Jon Lester gave up the first run, but he did prevent them from scoring. I believe he pitched 7 innings, so he prevented any runs in the other 6 innings. So he did extremely well in that game. But enough about that. With the Cubs, I know a lot of you are saying, a lot of you were blaming Joe Maddon for the loss, and you were blaming a lot of the other players and things like that. But here's the thing: I have 3 main reasons, 3 very big reasons why the Cubs lost that game, and some of them aren't specifically pointing at specific people. A lot of them are, or a couple. One of them is pointing specifically at the MLB and not really with the Cubs. But anyways, my first and most important reason is the amount of games that the Cubs played. I'll get into later details. I'm just going to give you my thesis, basically, for my argumentative essay. Thank you, Notre Dame English classes. But anyways, so the first reason why the Cubs lost that game is because of their schedule. The second reason was some very bad substitution changes that fixed the entire game. Anyways, and then the last reason, one of the more understandable reasons, is the awful hitting and the awful offense by the Cubs. So getting into the first reason, the schedule for the Cubs. If you did not know this, I am including the wild card game. The Cubs played 48 games in 50 days. 48 games in 50 days. Just think about that for a second. That's incredible. The Cubs, in total, had 1 day off in September. They had 1 day off. There was one game with the Nationals that was postponed, but they still had to travel all the way out to Washington, D.C., so I'm not counting that as a day off. But still, they played baseball almost every single day in September. I know a lot of you guys are saying, yeah, but these guys are they're professional athletes. Like, they have to basically, they have to be able to play for this amount of schedule. They should be used to it. Yeah, but imagine you're at school. I'm going to say this because I'm at school. I was talking to another one of the students in the school, and he came up with this analogy. Imagine you're at school every single day of the month. You go to school and you work hard every single day, and you only get 1 day off in the month. We at least get the weekends off with a couple of extra days off, but every single day you go in and give it your best. 100%. Yeah, that's a lot. So 48 games in 50 days. To me, that's just absolutely incredible. That's just awful by the MLB. I know people say, yeah, but it rained a lot in April and things like that. But you should at least you should at least factor in those games. You should at least say, hey, like, these guys are playing a lot of games in September. Maybe we should, we should think about, how other games, other postponed games, rained out games, how they'll come into play. And the Cubs did play one doubleheader game against the Mets, and that was here at Wrigley on August 29th. So they did have a doubleheader game. So they had more than just 2 days off. They had 3 days off, but one of those games was a doubleheader. So it was very hard on the Cubs. It was very, very difficult on the Cubs to really show to really show their stuff, because it was less time that the starters were given to rest, because they played games consecutively and they weren't given breaks. And if you were in a hitting slump, which kind of bleeds into my third point, that the Cubs, or I guess kind of like my second point, that the Cubs were in a hitting slump in basically September and going into October. If you're in a slump, there is no break in between the slump. So if you're in a slump, you're basically playing games consecutively without any break, and you may stay in that slump. There were a lot of guys on the team that just couldn't hit in September. Wilson Contreras was one of those guys. He was not good in the second half of the season. Wilson Contreras was, in my mind, in the first half of the season, the best offensive catcher maybe in the MLB. I mean, you have guys like Yadier Molina and all those other guys that are very good. But Wilson Contreras was up there, and he had a ton of potential, and then he started to slump. He was hitting close to 280, 290 maybe in the first half of the season. And then he finished off the year with a 245 and only had, I think it was 9 home runs. So he did not have a good year. Kris Bryant was hurt basically throughout most of the year, and he started to struggle, and his hitting was not as good as people wanted it to be, and so he struggled. And Kris Bryant is one of your most productive guys on the team. And when he's starting to struggle, a lot of other guys start to struggle. But there was one guy in particular that was not struggling, and that was Javier Baez. And Javier Baez had an incredible year. He's a candidate for the MVP. I don't think he'll win MVP. I know if you listen to the other sports broadcast radio podcasts, you would at least know that I was a big advocate for Javier Baez winning the MVP, but I just don't think I don't think he's good enough. Looking at guys like Christian Yelich and Nolan Arenado, they were so good this year. Nolan Arenado was absolutely incredible, not just in the wild card game, but in the season. And he was just so good. And Christian Yelich is basically leading everything. He's got a batting average up there, his home run is up there, and his RBIs are up there. I believe he is above 100 RBIs. But anyways, Javier Baez did have a great second half of the season. He led the NL in RBIs. He had 34 home runs, 35 home runs. So he was definitely up there as one of the top guys on the team. But the rest of the team struggled. In that wild card game especially, there were a lot of guys who just didn't do well. Daniel Murphy was 0 for 4. He was 0 for 4 in that game. He did get intentionally walked, though, so his on-base percentage was up there. But he just couldn't hit the ball. Chris Bryant was 1 for 6 with 3 strikeouts. One of your most dominant guys on the team, and he just did not do well at all. It was awful for him in the wild card game. And these guys were just slumping, and their offense was awful. An interesting fact: if you watch that game if you watch that wild card game, you would see guys like Matt Vasgersian. We're always talking about how like the Cubs they had 39 games where they scored 0 or 1 run. And that was second in the league. Second in the MLB. The first place team was the Baltimore Orioles, who had 40. So they were only 1 game behind them. The Baltimore Orioles, well, I don't even want to talk about them. They had 47 wins on the year. 47 wins. Which means the Cubs did not have a very good offensive year, as you can tell. They have 39 games where they only scored 1 run or less. So that goes to the defense, as just showing how dominant they are on defense. Chris Bryant, one of the better third basemen in the league, although he was out for most of the year. Nolan Arenado, in my mind, had a much better season. And not just in my mind, statistically speaking, in a much better season than Chris Bryant. Javier Baez, he can play anywhere in the infield. He plays second base. He played shortstop when Addison Russell was out. And I do want to say, however, I believe Addison Russell was officially suspended for 40 games. And that will translate into next year. So Addison Russell will be out for 40 games. And he said he's not going to appeal it. So it is final that it is 40 games, so just to let you know. But anyways, Javier Baez was very good defensively. Daniel Murphy, he did pretty well on defense for a guy that isn't really good on defense. But on defense, these guys are really... Albert Almora is a great center fielder. He's been great for the Cubs. I love this kid. Albert Almora has such great potential, and he was a pinch hitter at the start of the year, and now Joe Madden loves him as a starter, and he really shows it. He has, I believe, like close to a 290 batting average, so he was up there this season as one of the top guys. So the Cubs defensively have been very good. Their bullpen was not good at all. In the wild card game, their pitching, you can't put the blame on the pitching whatsoever. You cannot put the blame on the pitching. No matter what they say, you cannot. John Lester had a great game. Kyle Hendricks, although he did give up the final run, he did pitch very well. Jesse Chavez, I believe, pitched, and he did pretty well. And all these guys came on in relief. Cole Hamels was great in relief, by the way. That was his second career game in relief. And the last one, I believe, was in 2012, I want to say. So, pitching-wise, they did do very well in the wild card game, but in the bullpen, they were not very good in the season. Guys like Carl Edwards Jr. had a very bad year. Brandon Morrow got hurt towards the end of the season. Brendan Mara was the closer for the team, and one of the guys that Joe Madden used to always love to go to because, Brendan Mara was really good. So Jesse Chavez and Steve Chizik all became guys that Joe Madden really trusted in the bullpen, but they're just other guys that couldn't. Pedro Strop had a okay year this year. I mean, I believe he was hurt for some of it, but he wasn't very good this year. He came out in relief in the wild card game and did pretty well, but the bullpen was not very good, and you had to rely on your starters. You had to rely on your starters to pitch for 7 innings because you didn't want to go to your bullpen, which kind of goes into the point about their schedule. If you have your starters pitching 6 or 7 innings, then they need more rest because they're pitching for more innings, and they weren't getting the rest that they needed because of the amount of games that they played. And the bullpen wasn't getting the rest that they needed too, because a lot of times if one of your starters had a bad start, the bullpen had to come out. They had to come out early, and it just wasn't good pitching wise for the Cubs this year. The starters did pretty well. John Lesser had a great year. He had 18 wins. I really liked Cole Hamels. I mean, he didn't have the best record. I believe his record was 9-12 in the year, but I believe Cole Hamels was great, and he had a great year this year. And I think for the Cubs, they need to work on their bullpen in the offseason. Try and get guys. I know guys want to get Bryce Harper, but I mean, I would be fine with Bryce Harper. I know a lot of people are hesitant on getting Bryce Harper. I mean, he didn't have the stats that everyone wanted last year, but I seem to really like Bryce Harper, and I think especially because the Nationals didn't make it to the playoffs, I think he's going to want to leave and go somewhere. Anyways, I'm getting off topic. I always get off topic. But anyways, so going into the point that the Cubs are slumping, offensively, they just weren't there. They weren't hitting as they should have. Their batting average was not up there. I believe they were very high in the league in strikeouts, and they were striking out all the time. And just Javi Baez, one of your more productive guys, did not have a good game by any means necessary. I wouldn't say that. He wasn't as productive as people wanted him to be. He did have the only RBI in the game, but that was his only hit too. He was 1 for 5, and he had 2 strikeouts. So it was not very good for him. I think the nerves just came to Javi Baez's head. He started swinging at things that were way outside and was very anxious, and his 2016, 2017 self came back to him, and all of this year kind of got forgotten from him. So it just wasn't a great game for him overall. However, there were just so many things. I shouldn't say however. There just were so many things wrong for the Cubs. Ben Zobrist, your leading hitter for the team with a .305 batting average on the year, was 1 for 6 and struck out once, and then just didn't have a great year overall. Didn't have a great. He didn't have a good wild card game. He had a good year. He was .305, so he did pretty well. He was the leading hitter for the Cubs. So it just wasn't good for the Cubs hitting wise. And for the Cubs, one of the things that really made them struggle was just bad. My third point now is the bad substitutions by Joe Madden. There were a couple of really, really good substitutions that worked, but there were other that were like, yeah, Joe, like, what are you doing, Joe? I understand you have you make unique decisions, but some of these were For example, I know a lot of people will argue that this is a good one, but Terrence Gore for Anthony Rizzo. I know a lot of you all are saying, oh, but Terrence Gore scored the run. If he didn't steal second base, Javi Baez wouldn't have gotten that RBI. I understand that. And for that play, that's why it was for that one play, that's why it was a good idea for them to put in Terrence Gore. But then afterwards, that was what, like the 8th inning, 7th inning when they did that? They played 13 innings. And so you just took out your best hitter, Anthony Rizzo. You just took him out of the game. Anthony Rizzo was already 1 for 4. And so you just took him out of the game. For Terrence Gore, who only had 15 career at-bats before that game. Yes, he's a very fast guy, but he was 1 for 15 going into that game. 1 for 15. If he only had 15 at-bats, how do you expect him, or if you only had 15 at-bats in the regular season, how do you expect him to do well in the postseason? And I was sure they were maybe going to take him out and put in someone else, but they couldn't. They couldn't because they didn't have any guys in the bench. They didn't. They used all the guys. They used all the guys as pinch hitters. Another substitution that I did not like. Going back to Terrence Gore. Terrence Gore was 0 for 2. Terrence Gore could have had a walk. And he had a mental breakdown that second at bat. People were saying, listen, all Terrence Gore had to do was just not swing at the ball because that pitcher was going to throw that pitcher was going to throw a very bad pitch to try and get him to swing. But Terrence Gore swung anyways. And so Terrence Gore struck out on a play that he could have gotten the first base, maybe stolen second, and could have gotten that tying run, but he didn't. If Anthony Rizzo was up there, it could have been a different circumstance. Anthony Rizzo was definitely one of your best hitters going into the wild card, and they took him out. It was not very good. I did not like seeing Anthony Rizzo on the bench. He was too comfortable on the bench. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be like a parent, but it just wasn't. It wasn't good. And as Anthony Rizzo was one of your best hitters going into that game, taking him out and putting him in for a guy that was 1 for 15, basically just getting 2 at-bats in the game, it was just not good. And I'm sorry, it's early morning. It's early morning. I'm tired, by the way. So anyways, just Terrence Gore he only had 15 at-bats going into that game, and making him get 2 postseason at-bats for your best hitter going into that game, it just wasn't a smart idea for me. And I know they weren't expecting to play 13 innings. I know they were just trying to get it done then and there, but it didn't work because your other guys were struggling to hit. Another one I was very, very concerned on was Jason Heyward over Kyle Schwarber. They put Jason Heyward in for a substitution, but Kyle Schwarber was just a pinch hitter. That was very questionable to me, considering Jason Heyward's postseason numbers and Kyle Schwarber's postseason numbers. Jason Heyward, I believe, had like a 120 batting average in the postseason and had close to 130 at-bats, I believe. He has the worst postseason batting average in the MLB. The worst. Or maybe one of the worst ever. He does not have the postseason numbers. And Jason Heyward really showed why he shouldn't have been out there. He was 0 for 3. He left 4 runners on base. 4 runners on base. You could have gotten 2 of those in. If you got 2 of those in, the Cubs would have won the game. But he didn't. And so it wasn't, I did not like that idea whatsoever. But Kyle Schwarber should have absolutely gotten into the game. I think they should have. You could have kept. You could have moved him over to left field and put maybe Terrence Gore somewhere. You could have put Terrence Gore in right field. You could have put Terrence Gore somewhere, but Jason Heyward is definitely one of your better defensive players. He has won multiple Golden Gloves out in right field, but he at some points he had a good offensive year, but postseason wise, it just wasn't good at all. And I was very hesitant on that substitution. I did not think it was a good idea because you're looking at Jason Heyward's postseason numbers, and they weren't up there by any means necessary, and it was not good. I don't think this was a good decision by Joe Maddon to put Jason Heyward in over Kyle Schwarber. Kyle Schwarber has been known to do extremely well in the postseason. They still have that ball framed up on top of the scoreboard in right field from Anthony Rizzo's home run, and I believe it was a wild card game in 2015, I want to say. 2016, 2015. I don't think it was 2016 because I don't think it was when they won the World Series. So that ball is still framed up there. But I just think, they just weren't doing well offensively. Going back to my 3 points, they just weren't doing well offensively. The schedule was not working for them whatsoever, and there were just bad substitution changes overall. I'm interrupting my conclusion, but anyways, another bad substitution change, pitching wise. I understand the position you're in where you have all of these pitchers at your dispense because it's a wild card game. You can use your starters in relief, but to only put Justin Wilson out there for one batter, I was very iffy on that call. You only put him in for one batter, considering you're in extra innings, and it's only a 1-1 game, so it could be a very tight game. Justin Wilson was not bad in the bullpen. He was not bad. And he was one of your better guys. And to only put him in for one batter and then take him out was very questionable for me, considering how small of a bullpen the Cubs have in comparison to their good versus bad players. Maybe they could have kept him in that entire inning. You never know. They did put Cole Hamilton, who had a great night, so that wasn't bad. But still, I was iffy on that. If it went more than 13 innings, maybe they could have used Justin Wilson to pitch for an inning or two. So, I don't know. These are all what ifs. What if Anthony Rizzo was still in the game? What if the Cubs didn't play 48 games in 50 days? What if the Cubs just started hitting the ball? What if Chris Bryant wasn't hurt throughout most of the year? Would he have his stats up there? Would, he be up there with 100 RBIs and 40 home runs like he has before when he won the NL MVP? All these what ifs. The Cubs almost over a week ago were sitting comfortably in first place. I wouldn't say comfortably. They were sitting in first place in the division. And, the Brewers are coming up there, but they had the best team in the National League. They had the best record. They were the best team in the National League. And if you were to tell me that the Cubs were to lose in the wild card game, I would think you were crazy because they were sitting in first place. Plus, they were the best team in the National League. How could they possibly lose a wild card game? But what happens? I think this is a wake-up call of the Cubs. I know a lot of people were putting the blame on Joe Maddon. What the heck is... I know a lot of you people were saying, what the heck was Joe Maddon doing? Doing all these really bad substitution changes and all of these things that were going on, and it just wasn't very good overall by the Cubs. And a lot of people were putting the blame on Joe Madden, but the thing is, you can't put that blame on Joe Madden. He just didn't have a lot to work with. And overall, I just think he does not deserve to be fired, and he's not going to be fired. The Cubs have said that because I think that's a really smart decision. Why fire a guy who, who's won Manager of the Year, and he's definitely one of the reasons why the Cubs are still, why the Cubs are such a good team. You can't really say they were a good team, but they have been a good franchise, and he helped them win that World Series. And a lot of people are saying, oh, but that's changing away. What other manager are you going to get, though? Joe Madden is definitely one of the better. He's probably, in my mind, one of the best managers ever. He's super unique. A lot of his substitutions, like I was saying, were a little bit questionable, but they were up there. And I thought he did extremely well. And I just think for the Cubs, they got to make some changes to their bullpen in the offseason. And maybe think about getting Bryce Harper. I know a lot of you guys are thinking about it. I don't know. I think their offense needs a little bit of a boost that maybe Bryce Harper can get. It's always about that locker room presence too. Make sure if you guys like these, if you like these podcasts and sports radio, sports wrap up shows, make sure you make sure you talk to us on. Make sure you talk to us on Twitter. We have a Twitter account, _NDCP. If you want to contact us, give us tips, suggestions, questions to think about in our next show, make sure you do that because we take any suggestions that we need. Again, that is _NDCP. We'll be trying to do the sports wrap up again at least once a week. Again, we are high school students, so we have very busy schedules. So again, make sure you maybe leave a tweet over to us letting us know. If you want us to talk about something specific, let us know. But again, this concludes the sports wrap-up for today. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm Ryan Dalkin here just talking about Chicago sports and I guess professional sports overall. But thank you all for listening today. And again, sorry about the Cubs losing, but go Bears and go Dons.